In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart." Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, "Let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" Then the king said to me, "What are you requesting?" So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it." And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone? And when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy." And the king granted me what I asked for the good hand of my God was upon me. You may take your seats. For our subject this morning, God has his hand on you. God has his hand on you. Then here lies the question. What happens when the peace that we desire seems to be replaced with panic, or the help that we were counting on or anticipating is met with hate? How do we respond to the challenge the single parent faces? Or what about the child or children who've been mentally or physically or sexually abused? Like, how do we respond to the plight of the homeless or the disenfranchised? What about the unemployed? How do we respond to a broken home? We've got this idea of what the family should look like, and things didn't quite pan out the way you desired for them. How do you respond to a broken home? How do you rebuild after the marriage didn't fare the way you thought it would? How do you get back up after experiencing defeat after defeat? How do you press forward after being paralyzed by the unfavorable diagnosis? What about losing a loved one? Like, how do you respond to the challenges of life? This morning, family, I want to place under the microscope the response. If we were to go back and review chapter 1 of Nehemiah, we'll find that in verse 3, he learns that the city of Jerusalem is in shambles. The gates have been destroyed by fire. This is home for Nehemiah. And he hears this word in verse 4 of chapter 1, and he does 5 things. He sat down, he wept, he mourned, he fasted, and he prayed. The scripture says, as soon as I heard these words, I sat down, I wept, I mourned, I fasted, I prayed. Now, there's something golden in that passage for us right there. It's not our thematic text, but a lot of times we live in this microwave society. Everything is hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. We could learn something from Nehemiah if we would just sit in it for a minute. You miss your people. Grandpa's not here anymore. It's okay to grieve how you grieve. It's okay to sit in that thing for a moment, but be intentional while you do it. You see, he sat down for a moment. He wept, he mourned, he fasted, he prayed. There's nothing wrong with crying through that situation. My dad went home to be with Jesus a few years back, and there are times I'm still driving, and I have to pull the car over because I'm in tears. Can't even see out the windshield, but I'm in tears. It's okay to grieve how you grieve, but don't lose sight of what God is doing in your life. So Nehemiah prays in verse 5. He begins praying, and man, he's covering all of these things. He's covering people and his own personal sin. And then we get to the last verse in chapter 1. And it tells us that Nehemiah is the cupbearer to the king. So why is it that he's going through this challenge? What is the dilemma? What is the issue that he's responding in the way that he does? Well, the city is busted. It's vulnerable. Now, in these times when the gates were down, when the walls were down, your city was vulnerable. The enemy could slide in and have a field day, looting, rioting, taking whatever they desired. This was God's dwelling place, and the walls had not been rebuilt. It hit him to the core. You see, Nehemiah, just like many of the Jews, they had a severe love for home, just like us. How would you feel if you heard that Big Mama's house, the doors got removed off the hinges, the windows got taken out? See, most of us wouldn't even sleep. We would be on our way immediately. Well, this is where Nehemiah was, except for this was God's dwelling place. I want to focus on a few things because there are some things that trigger our responses. First, our head. All right, our ears are on our head. Typically, when we hear something, that what we hear seeps down to our heart. Then we find later on that we have an opportunity for the hand of God to help us out. Let me put it this way. We teach our children to commit scripture to memory so that eventually what they've got up here seeps down here, and then later on in life they can appropriate what it is that's in here to respond to the life that they are living. That's what this thing is all about. You see, Nehemiah heard something and he took action. Like he was in battle, but behind the scenes. You see, that's helpful for a lot of us because a lot of times we think that action means I got to go and get out there and get loud and proud. Sometimes you need to sit down, get on your knees, and talk to the Lord. Allow yourself to emote. Allow yourself to experience the emotion that you're experiencing. God gave you that emotion. Allow yourself to go through it. It makes perfect sense when we read in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, to guard our heart, for it is the wellspring of life. That's a big deal. That's why we have to be careful with our associations. We've got to be careful with the things that we do, because here Nehemiah, guys, he's burdened with a building project, and he's the cupbearer to the king. Now, this project was bigger than him, and here's the thing. God wants to build in your life. And where do you think he wants to build? Like, what is that thing that burdens you? Where does God want to start? Is it the homeless? Or maybe you have a burden burning on the inside for children that don't have the simple things that we take for granted every single day. Maybe you want to do something to help mothers or dads or whatever the case is. Wherever God is burdening your heart, perhaps that's where he wants to start building. And I want to encourage you to listen. Now, as we tackle this text, we're going to examine the recesses of our heart. Now, in verse 1 of chapter 2, all right, so we know Nehemiah has been in this place of fasting and praying. And what we find in verse 1 of what we've read in the month of Nisan, that's 4 months after he heard the word about Jerusalem. Now, Kislev is November, December in the Hebrew calendar. Nisan is March, April. So we're looking at about 4 months. Imagine this for a moment. He's the cupbearer to the king. So essentially, he's got to go into work as if ain't nothing going on and taste that wine. Now, what we don't know about a cupbearer is a cupbearer typically had the king's ear. The cupbearer could, intervene in foreign affairs because he had the king's ear, right? He could do a lot of stuff. He had the king's ear, but still, this is the same king that halted the project that Nehemiah is going to resume. It's the same one. So now Nehemiah is in a place, and it makes sense that verse 11 of chapter 1 tells us that he was the cupbearer to the king. One thing that we recognize in the text, to be sad or downtrodden in the king's presence could cost you your life, right? That was something that was not recommended for anybody, to be sad or downtrodden or in a depressive mode. Now, you remember Esther, all right? She had a cousin Mordecai. Now, when Mordecai heard the decree about the Jews and how they were going to be killed, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth, and he sat in ashes, and he was mourning. He wanted to go into the king's palace, but they wouldn't permit him because of his countenance. You see, Nehemiah is in a similar place. He's sad before the king, and the text reminds us that he was sad and he was also afraid. Now, in today's times, what will we call somebody that might be sad and afraid? Maybe they're depressed. Maybe they've got some anxiety. If we were to Google what to do to combat these emotions that we experience, this is what Google said to do. All right, it says, number 1, drink water. You're sad or depressed, go ahead and take a sip of water. All right? And tell us, how that fares for you. It says get a good night's sleep. All right, I can see that helping out, maybe a little bit. What about eat a wholesome meal? All right, now what if you don't have the means to do so? And, the value menu is all you can afford. Go for a walk. I can see that helping a bit. Turn off the news feed. All right, that'll work. All right, seems that we see nothing but bad news. Take stock of your mood. Tell someone how you're feeling. Breathe through the panic. This is what Google tells us, right? But here's what's fascinating. If we're being honest, there are times when you and I are also very much afraid and sad. But here's the good news. You're in good company. I don't know if you remember King David, but in Psalm chapter 147, this is what he says in verse 7. He says, answer me quickly, O Lord. My spirit fails. Hide not your face from me, lest I be like those who go down to the pit. This is King David, the giant slayer. If King David was sad and angry, then family, surely you and I are in good company. And what about Job? Now, you know Job's story. This was the guy that God bragged on to the enemy. Have you considered my servant Job? You remember? And look at what happens in chapter 2, verse 9. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. If he wasn't sad or depressed before then, he was definitely sad after he heard his wife, his rib, be like, hey, go ahead and check out. Hey, wait, what? And think about this, guys. This was Job, and we know how the story goes. In Job 3:11, this is what Job says. Why did I not die at birth? Come out from the womb and expire. My goodness, if you're dealing with sadness or anger or any type of emotion that society says is unbefitting of a Christian, I want to encourage you today, because these guys, these warriors in the text, they dealt with some challenges. And my friends, you will too, and you can overcome them. Just like Job did, just like David did, just like Nehemiah did, just like Jeremiah. He was known as the weeping prophet. The weeping prophet. Like, that don't even sound good. Like, but you speaking on behalf of the Lord and you always sad? We look at folk now like, you always mad? That's how you do? But this was the weeping prophet speaking on behalf of God. if you're sad, if you're angry, if you're irritated, my friends, you're in good company. Because there's a laundry list of teen warriors, man, that fought the fight and finished well. You see, Nehemiah is very sad and very afraid at this point, and he's got to go dialogue with the king. Now, there's a pattern to the recorded exchange in Nehemiah 2. Now, the king's verbal responses are in verses 2, 4, and 6, while Nehemiah's responses are in most of the odd numbers. You know, the 3, 5, 7, with the exception of 8. So in verse 3, he says, I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Now watch this. Nehemiah is very diplomatic here. Did you notice that he's having this uncomfortable conversation with his superior, and he didn't mention Jerusalem? Did you catch that? Why don't you think he mentioned where he was trying to go? Well, you remember this was the same king that halted the project way back then. So ultimately, he's got to go before King Artaxerxes and basically have him reverse the decree that you already sent back in the day. So now he's got to be diplomatic. He's got to strategize of how he goes in to deal with the king. And guys, we can pull something from that. You ain't got to tell everybody what God told you to do. That's not everybody's business. A lot of times he'll light the fire in the man or the woman, and then they'll share when God tells them to. See, that's your business. What God tells you isn't necessarily for anybody else. There are people that are trying to assassinate what the enemy, what the Lord wants to do in your life, and you've got to be careful who you share what the Lord is doing to. Notice he leaned in on the emotional status he was experiencing over the last 4 months. He spoke in a way that the king heard his heart, right? How do we know that? Because in verse 4, the king says, what are you requesting? This is a superior dignitary taking request from an inferior noble servant. What are you requesting? Right? Then Nehemiah does something that we all should do. He says, then I prayed to the God of heaven. So let me paint the picture for you. Nehemiah is already sad and he's already afraid. Now he's standing before the king. He's standing before the king and he's wondering, imagine all of the emotions that he's facing. Okay, what do I need to say? If I say too much, man, he might even kill me. If I don't say enough, I might not get this project underway. All of the emotions that he's experiencing, and he stands before the king and he throws up a pocket prayer. I like to call them pocket prayers, kind of like the elevator presentation, right? Where you have a short amount of time to say what needs to be said, but you got to say it. That's what he did. It's kind of like what we read in Psalm 51, create in me, God, a pure heart and renew a right spirit within me. You know, it's kind of those things that we say when we need God. You like when Peter, you remember Peter was walking on the water. And then he started to look at the circumstances and he started to sink and he said, Lord, save me. That's a pocket prayer. You see, some of you guys are going in Monday and you got an interview. You're kind of intimidated. You're afraid. Maybe there's a position that you're trying to land. All of these things that you're facing. And you've got to go in there and you've got to land that position. Some of us need to have a pocket prayer at all times because God is still doing what he does, but he loves when we commune with him in every scenario. You see, we don't have a problem taking our phone everywhere we go. Why don't we take God everywhere we go? Why don't we say, oh, okay, I'm going to the grocery store. Well, God, what would you have me do while I'm in the grocery store? Oh, I'm going into the school. I see a lot of people frowning. God, how would you have me encourage the students as they start a brand new year? God, how would you have me encourage the teachers as a lot of them are afraid and scared, and rightfully so. It's a lot going on. We've got to have pocket prayers on deck. Nehemiah's heart was heard because of the response from the king. In other words, the king says, how can I help you? This is the king of Persia, a vast and wide empire of whom was led by this outstanding individual by the name of King Artaxerxes. Now, I don't know if you know about Susa the Citadel. Now, this was a place that many kings would go and retreat. All right, it was a beautiful place. And you remember Kislev is November, December, around the holidays. So the king and all of his dignitaries and all of his teams, all out there hanging out, having a wonderful time. Surely Nehemiah's got to be in the place as the wine was likely before the king. All of these things going on, and here Nehemiah is strategizing on what needs to be said to the king. But the question then becomes, what do you think happened that encouraged Nehemiah to throw up the pocket prayer? Because he'd been fasting and praying for 4 months now. What do you think it was? Do you think it was just a sadness or maybe a fear that was trying to rule his heart? Maybe he felt inadequate. Maybe he couldn't articulate what it was he needed. Maybe he just needed reassurance. How many of you guys are on that journey? And sometimes you just need to know, all right, Lord, tell me again. Is that what you said? Is that where you want me to go? I need you to just tell me one more time. We might need to throw a fleece, right? We might need to hear from the Lord just one more time, Lord. Touch me again, Lord. I want to make sure I've got this thing right. Have you ever prepared a PowerPoint presentation and everything, all of your animations are wonderful? You click in the mouse and everything flows like it needs to. All of the different sounds and voices that you need and the graphics and all of the things that you need in this PowerPoint presentation are built. The message is ready. You're ready to prepare. Everything that you need is there. The message is good. All of your animations are well. But the messenger is not prepared. Maybe Nehemiah was a little bit unprepared for what he was about to do. You see, for the preacher, a lot of times the sermon looks wonderful on paper, but then the messenger isn't prepared. You ever got a package at your house that don't belong to you? The package is ready, but the deliverer was maybe unprepared to deliver that message. That's why, guys, we've got to have a pocket prayer, because the message is already ready. We've got the word of God, but the messengers have got to be prepared. We've got to be ready in season and out of season to deliver what it is God has placed on the heart of his people. That's our business. That's why I believe Nehemiah said, Lord, I need you right now. You see, the text doesn't tell us exactly what it was he said, but we know that what he said moved God because of what we see next. All right, let's look at the text. Verse 5. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, the city of my father's graves. You remember, he didn't mention Judah or Jerusalem before. Now his confidence is a little bit stronger. Now there's a progression. You see, this is the same Nehemiah that heard something. It seeped down to his heart. Now he's seeing the hand of God in the situation. Now he's got a little more confidence. And the same thing happens with us, family. When we start to pray, see, praying changes the prayer. When we lock shields and really get in that thing, it changes us from the inside out. It gives us a boost. It gives us a little bit more confidence. Now he's laying it on. He says, the city, send me to the city of Judah, the city of my father's graves, that I might rebuild it. It appears that the fear that was expressed at the end of verse 2 has now been replaced with sharp, clear, and a concise boldness. In other words, Nehemiah, empowered by God, was making his request known to the earthly king, while the King of Kings, who is still the supreme king, was the one ultimately granting the request. You see, he was talking to King Artaxerxes, but it was the ultimate king of kings that was doing the bidding. It was him that was holding the reins. It was him that was orchestrating this entire scenario from jump. But Nehemiah still had to go. And the king said to me, verse 6, the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. Essentially, the same question is asked twice here. Now, when we read further, we'll learn that the cupbearer was gone about 12 years. Now, I don't know what kind of PTO Nehemiah had. I don't know, what kind of situation he had set up. But it fascinates me to see how meticulous the record is until it gets to this time. Why do we think that is? Like, why didn't we get precision as it relates to this time right here in the text? Here's the thought. Because most of us will march into our jobs on tomorrow and be like, if it pleases the boss, if the boss has found favor in my sight, I need to go on a leave of absence for about 10 years. If it pleases the king, I need some resources to build the media room, to build the baby room. We would abuse the privilege like we so often do. But what I love about the situation is since the hand of God was already on, the king was already primed to move the way the Lord would have him move. Fascinating to me that we don't see that, but we learn later on Nehemiah was gone 12 years. 12 years. This is an answered prayer. You remember the pocket prayer that Nehemiah threw up? Now it has come to fruition. Now it has come to pass. And then Nehemiah, he begins to lay it on. He says, and I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, verse 8, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. Where does that kind of strategy come from? I mean, do you notice that? He was minimal in his response at the beginning of the passage. Now, after he prayed, the strategy is real. He's asking for everything, even the resources to build his house while he's gone. Imagine what the king might have been thinking then. Well, hold on, you asked to go somewhere, but you building a house too? So you ain't coming back? I mean, think about that for a minute. But since God's hand was on it, like it didn't even matter if he never came back, because it was God's hand in the process. You remember, this whole thing started with something he heard. And that thing that he heard seeped down to his heart. And now we see the hand of God in the entire scenario. But watch the exchange. Nehemiah, or King Artaxerxes, saw Nehemiah with his eyes, and he was moved in his heart. You remember he asked him, what is this sadness? This is only sadness of the heart. He saw with his eyes, those sensory receptors sent message down to King Artaxerxes' heart. And now, King Artaxerxes has given a decree to let Nehemiah go back and rebuild Jerusalem because of the hand of God. Might I suggest to you that the hand of God is on you. You need only stand. You need only go into that battle. I know you might be looking at a giant. You might be looking at an unfavorable diagnosis. You might be looking at circumstances that, man, only God can fix. Well, guess what? You're in great company because he can and he will. All right, so what can we pull from this text? All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and give us some applications. The first two applications are something that you and I can do right now. The third thing is a reminder of what God is all about and his sovereignty, his providence. The first thing is, guys, we've got to produce through the pain. Look at verses 1 and 2. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. You see, sometimes, guys, we're going to have to go to work when we toe up on the inside. You see, we're going to have to go and deal with folks in the place of worship when we don't even feel like it, when we don't even like dealing with some of the things that we have to deal with. Sometimes you're going to have to go in there when you hadn't slept in 2 days, when you're not prepared, when you don't know exactly what's going to happen. What I found in my own personal experience, the more tired I am, the stronger God's presence is on my life. I want to encourage you not to throw in the towel, but to recognize that you've got to still produce through the pain. You still got to fight through the challenges. The next thing I want you to really understand this, because this fear thing has a way of paralyzing the men and women of God. You've got to pray through that fear. That's the first thing that you've got to do. You've got to, after you produce through the pain, you've got to pray through that fear. Notice that Nehemiah was fearful at the end of verse 2, but prayerful at the end of verse 4. What is the Lord sharing with us this morning? Well, there's an antidote to fear, and it's prayer. Fear is mentioned over 365 times in the Word of God. That means you can tackle fear every single day. Every single day, you can tackle that fear. You can use that fear as a springboard. You see, Nehemiah was fearful, but he stayed the course. You see, it was Peter that started to sink. He got fearful, and then the Lord came in after he threw up the pocket prayer. Guys, we've got to stay steady and understand that there's going to be some fearful times. One theologian said that fear is false evidence appearing real. In other words, what our imagination begins to concoct, we start to see. But let me tell you something. When you start praying and surrendering all of those thoughts, all of those emotions to God, fear starts to subside, and it becomes the springboard to propel you into something else. I want to encourage you to get a handle on those fears, overcome those fears. Is it easy? No. None of this stuff is. But with God, all things are possible. Let God do your fighting. And finally, God's providence is prevalent even today. Now, one thing that we didn't talk a lot about is the fact that his timing is impeccable. Now, this decree to go and rebuild the walls was prophecy. In fact, over in Daniel 9, the prophecy begins. Daniel 9 talks about the walls, Jerusalem being rebuilt, and the Messiah coming. And what we find is that the prophecy came to fruition because it was Jesus that came back into the city of Jerusalem riding in on the donkey. It came to fruition. Why do you think that it was 4 months that Nehemiah was fasting and mourning? Why didn't he go the next day and talk to King Artaxerxes? Because God's timing is impeccable. Like his sovereignty, he's orchestrating every single thing that you're battling right now. He's got a time stamp on everything that you're facing. But you've still got to go the course, because we're not God. We use the changer, the reformer of the world, the one who sits high and looks low. We talk to him. We communicate with him. He's the ultimate physician. But his timing is impeccable. I want to encourage you, because Nehemiah asked for a leave of absence. He got letters to the governors. He got letters to Asaph for lumber and the supplies to build his beams. And what we do know is that in verse 9, this is something he didn't even ask for, but he got it. He got an armed military entourage to go with him. He didn't ask for that. What is the point? When God is in it, he does the exceeding and the abundant, more than we can ask or even think. When God is in it, it's the game changer. I want to encourage you, it might not look like you're going to win that thing. It might not look like things are going to work in your favor, but if God led you to it, he will carry you through it. There's going to come a time where you're going to wonder, how in the world did God take me from there to here? I want to encourage you, stay the course. Keep on fighting. It's a new season. Today has never been seen before, nor will it be seen again. God is up to something, and he's looking for Nehemiahs. He's looking for people just like you that are going to say yes to the assignment, that are going to jump off and say, I got you, God. I'll hold high the bloodstained banner of Jesus Christ. He's looking for a Nehemiah that will say yes, even when they don't get all of the instruction. He's looking for a Nehemiah that doesn't mind standing before kings and throwing up a pocket prayer. My question for you is there a Nehemiah in here today? Is there one in here today that doesn't mind saying yes to the assignment? Because we're in the season of leveling up our faith in Christ. We're in the season of producing through pain. We're in the season of praying through fear. We're in the season of seeing God's favor in the midst of the challenges we face. For the students in the room, it's a brand new school year, a brand new semester. You have an opportunity to draw a line in the sand. You have an opportunity to be a Nehemiah on your campus. You've got an opportunity to hold high the bloodstained banner of Jesus Christ. My question for you is, will you accept the assignment? Right? You got to be on the team first. Right? You can't just put on the jersey. You got to be on the team first. So I'm going to ask the question, because all of this sounds fun. You might even be encouraged, maybe an ounce. But are you on the team? Because that Messiah that was prophesied in Daniel 9, man, he came. He did what he was born to do. He got up on that cross, and he did so with you in mind. I mean, imagine that as he's being beaten, as they're spitting on him, as they're throwing rocks, calling him all types of names. They beat him so that he was unrecognizable. He stayed the course, and he did it for you. My question for you is, will you choose him? As I invite my brothers up here, that's the main question. They're saying nothing else matters. You've got to make Jesus the center of your heart. You might be in here today and you're wondering, man, what is this joy that these folks have? Who is this Jesus that they sing about? I want to give you that opportunity right now to say yes to Jesus. Will you choose him today? It will be the best decision that you ever make in your life. Don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed. Just come to him.